Good morning, Jesse. I don't know why it has to be live, but apparently it does. And we are going to get started. I hope you can hear me. I know right now you don't have any sound or anything, but if you want to give a thumbs up if you can, or raising your hand, whatever, that's fine. I hope you can hear. If not, I will. Awesome. Perfect. I will. This is recording. I didn't know that, but I can actually forward this to you. So if you ever want to use it in future reference, perfect. Good morning. My name is Miriam Owens, and I'm actually VOSHA's Compliance Assistant Specialist. So I provide the outreach for Vermont employers throughout the state. I am the only one of me. What they lovingly call me is the happy face of VOSHA, since not a lot of people are happy to see VOSHA come on site, especially when they're going to potentially be cited or if there's an incident. So our goal today is just to equip you with just the knowledge and the tools necessary to prevent heat illness and protect your workforce. And then we'll just cover key topics such as recognizing the symptoms of heat stress, implementing effective preventative strategies, understanding your responsibilities under VOSHA's regulations. And at the end of the session, there will be a dedicated time for any questions or discussion if you'd like. Just write down any questions that you may have throughout the presentation, and we get those at the end. So let's dive into this. Let me make sure I can get everything set up, as I am not in my normal workspace. So when we talk about heat illness, it's important to understand that it's not just about being uncomfortable in hot weather. I'm always uncomfortable in hot weather. But heat illness happens when the body can no longer keep itself cool enough to maintain a safe internal temperature. And that can actually happen both outdoors and indoors when the temperatures and humidity rise, which this week is going to be a telltale sign of heat and hotness. So this is a good presentation prior to this lovely heat warning that we're having this week. As temperatures do rise, the body does rely on that natural cooling system to regulate heat. One of the primary ways it does this is by increasing the heart rate, and that heart pumps more blood to the skin and extremities just to help remove any heat away from the vital organs and release it through the skin. So the body also produces that sweat, and as the sweat evaporates, it removes the heat and cools the body. However, like many Vermont summers, in humid conditions, sweat cannot evaporate as easily, making it much harder for the body to cool itself when multiple risk factors are present, including high temperatures, direct sunlight, physical demanding work, hot equipment, heavy or non-breathable personal protective equipment, or PPE, dehydration, or lack of acclimatization in new or returning workers. So when that body can no longer regulate its temperature, heat-related illness can develop and rapidly increase in severity. So every year, dozens of workers across the United States lose their lives, and thousands more suffer serious illness due to heat exposure in the workplace. And while exact numbers vary year to year, the federal data does continue to show that heat remains a persistent and unrecognized occupational hazard, in many cases likely going unreported. So in Vermont, workers in industries such as construction, agriculture, landscaping, manufacturing, utilities, indoor facilities, without any adequate climate control may be exposed to hazardous heat conditions while performing their jobs. And although Vermont is known for its cooler climate, periods of elevated temperatures and humidity during the summer months, they can still create dangerous working conditions. So it's also important to recognize that heat illness is not limited to outdoor work. As I've said previously, indoor environments such as warehouses and commercial kitchens, production areas, and mechanical environments such as mechanical spaces can accumulate significant heat. And these conditions can place workers at risk even when outdoor temperatures seem pretty moderate. So OSHA does have a national emphasis program for specifically heat. They did reactivate it, I guess you could say, April this year. So the National Emphasis Program is an initiative that Occupational Safety and Health Administration uses to focus enforcement and outreach on specific hazards that are causing serious injury, illness, and fatalities. And heat is one of those hazards. And due to the increasing number of heat-related incidents across the country, OSHA did launch this NEP specifically targeting any heat hazards in the workplace. So the goal is simple: to reduce worker exposure to heat and prevent serious outcomes like heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Now, under that program, VOSHA is actually going to be increasing inspections in industries where workers are at higher risk. And these are often referred to as high hazard industries. And they typically include like construction, road work, agriculture, facilities that maybe don't have any cooling systems. So like warehouses, distribution centers. And there's a lot more than just that. And these workplaces either involve direct sun exposure, heavy physical labor, indoor heat sources like machines, anything like that, that can significantly raise the temperature. And so one important thing to understand is that inspections can be initiated when the heat index reaches a certain level. OSHA uses the heat index data to determine when the conditions may pose a higher risk. At the end of this presentation, I'll go over specifically what VOSHA does when it comes to this NEP. So during these inspections, compliance officers are actually looking just for key elements of a heat illness. Prevention program is going to be one thing. This includes access to drinking water, rest breaks, shaded or cooled areas, employee training, acclimatization procedures, and emergency response planning. So they may speak directly to employees to assess any understanding when it comes to heat risks and what they should do if they start experiencing any symptoms. Even though there isn't like currently a specific federal standard just for heat, OSHA does enforce any safety under the general duty clause, which means employers are still required to protect their workers from recognized hazards, including excessive heat. So the takeaway, just really heat safety is a national priority across this nation. Employers, especially those in high hazard industries, should be proactive, not just to meet OSHA expectations, but to protect their workers really and prevent any serious injuries. Now we're going to actually talk about the facts and how serious heat illness can be. And the next question is that you can just think about is what actually will increase that risk when it comes to getting heat illness. One of the biggest factors that we need to pay attention to is humidity. And when humidity levels climb, especially above 60%, it becomes much harder for the body to cool itself down. And when the conditions are both hot and humid, sweating alone may not be enough to keep our core temperature in a safe range. So what's happening inside the body is that when we're exposed to heat, the brain specifically, the hypothalamus signals the body to start cooling itself by producing sweat. And this is one of the primary defenses, I guess, for overheating. Under normal conditions, the sweat evaporates off the skin and the heat carries away with the wind. But in the process, when it comes to high humidity, our bodies aren't allowed to evaporate that sweat as efficiently as if it was maybe a dry heat. So instead of cooling you down, it'll just sit there on the skin, and that makes the body work harder, and it becomes much easier for heat to build up internally. And high heat combined with high humidity is just especially dangerous. Even in temperatures that don't seem extreme, the body can still struggle to regulate itself, increasing the risk of heat stress, heat exhaustion, or even heat stroke. So it's not just the temperature that we need to watch, it's the combination of temperature and humidity. So staying hydrated, taking breaks, and keeping an eye on yourself and your coworkers is actually a really critical step to preventing that heat-related illness. The next one we are going to talk about is when workers are exposed to direct sun. And the conditions can be much more dangerous than they might initially appear. So first, it's important to understand that the temperatures we often hear about, like the heat index, are actually typically taken in the shade. So when we step into the direct sun, the exposure can increase the effective heat index by as much as 15 degrees. And this means that a day that may seem moderate on paper can actually quickly become hazardous when you're working in the full sun. In addition to that, there's something called radiant heat. And this heat is the body absorbs directly from the sun's rays, adding to the overall heat load. And radiant heat doesn't just come from the sun. It can actually come from hot equipment, machinery, furnaces, or paved surfaces. That is why both outdoor and indoor work environments can present the similar risks when heat sources are present. Another factor to consider is a sunburn. So while it isn't classified as a heat illness, a sunburn can still impact the body's ability to cool itself, and it damages the skin, and it can make it more difficult for the body to regulate the temperature while also adding discomfort that can make work safely more challenging. And when you put it all together, it becomes clear that heat illness isn't just caused by the temperatures alone. It's actually the result of multiple factors: environmental heat, direct sunlight, radiant heat, and the additional heat your body generates during physical work. So that's why VOSHA actually uses the wet bulb globe temperature, or WBGT. And they're so useful, unlike like a standard thermometer, because they actually take into account the temperature, humidity, radiant heat, and air movement, giving a much more accurate picture of the actual heat stress workers are experiencing. It is also important to remember that even when temperatures are below public heat advisory levels, physical demanding work can be significantly increase that heat load on the body. So indoor environments can also create serious heat risks as well. So sometimes work without workers even realizing how hot it's getting. In many workplaces, heat is generated from the inside equipment, machinery, such as furnaces, ovens, dryers, other heat producing tools. It can raise that temperature really quickly and even keep them elevated throughout the day. At the same time, crowded workspaces can add to the problem. When multiple people are working together in the same area, body heat builds up and airflow becomes less effective, which increases the overall heat load in those spaces. So what it's important to remember is that the body responds to indoor heat the same way it does outdoor heat. Heart rate increases, sweating begins, and the body works to release that heat. But if the temperature, humidity, or workload becomes too much, those natural cooling mechanisms will be overwhelmed, leading to the heat stress, heat illness just as quickly as if they were outside. And because of this, prevention indoors is just as critical. Making sure there's proper ventilation, using fans to move hot air can make a significant difference. And providing an access to a cooler area, working time for a rest, recovery, helps the body regulate itself. Staying hydrated is also very essential. Even if it doesn't feel like you're sweating as much, the body is still losing fluids. And then just like with outdoor work, it's important to monitor early warning signs like dizziness, fatigue, nausea, excessive sweating. So indoor environments are not automatically safe from the heat. And recognizing those heat sources, monitoring those conditions, and taking proactive steps are just as important inside as they are outside. Limited air movement is another risk factor, and it can make heat illness more likely. If there's poor ventilation, the heat and humidity often get trapped, making it much harder for the body to cool down, even when the temperatures are not that extreme. Poor airflow can keep the body from cooling itself the way it normally would. So it becomes especially important in areas with like stagnant air, such as enclosed rooms, warehouses, mechanical spaces. The air movement plays a major role in keeping the worker safe. And when the airflow is limited, even moderate heat can become dangerous. And simple steps like using fans, improving ventilation, opening doors when safe to do so, or moving work to a breezier location can actually make a big difference when it comes to preventing that heat stress. So an example of this actually comes from a facility I used to work at, and they had a pretty good safety. Everything was pretty good when it came to the regulations on paper. But in this facility, they didn't have like any, it was an open air, um, it was like kind of like a sawmill, but it wasn't actually a sawmill. And then they had a shipping department. And then the sawmill area, the milling area, they had a higher roof, um, making it so that the heat would rise a lot higher. But in the shipping area, the roof was actually a lot lower. And we made insulation parts for transformers. And so there are these cylinders that were like 10 to 12 feet high. And the shipping department had to crate them. So they would get on these rolling stairs, which would get up close to the ceiling. And they didn't have a lot of airflow when it came to that location. And some of the employees were experiencing heat stress. Now, we knew that we had heat stress issues or heat problems. And so we did have where they needed to rotate out, or because we had the electrolyte popsicles in the break room, and the break room was cooled off. But a lot of times, which you will hear through this presentation, is that people don't like to stop in the middle of what they're doing and go take a rest break. They want to get the job done. This is where you have to, maybe as a leader, as a supervisor, you have to step in there and be like, okay, you're done. We're switching out a person because you need to go take a break. And because these employees were very much like that. They were very stubborn. No, I also want to get this done. I'm almost done. But it's important that we take care of our employees so that they will do the things that we want them to do, even if we don't have to tell them, right? So we have to it's kind of like build that culture that, no, we want you to take a break because we care about you, and we want you to go out and do that, and then switch and continue that system. Another important factor is increasing the liquid consumption. Along with proper airflow and cooling measures, staying hydrated is essential for helping the body maintain that heat stress, or manage that heat stress, not maintain it. We don't want to maintain it. When it's hot and humid and the body has to work harder and stay cool, it means we're losing a lot of water, losing a lot of electrolytes, and it's important to replace those fluids that we're actually losing, along with the electrolytes like sodium or potassium. And those losses can become even more worse if someone is also dealing with like diarrhea, vomiting, or a fever. Without enough fluids, body temperature can rise, increasing that risk of heat exhaustion or heat stroke. And some people are more vulnerable than others, like children or the elderly, because, and we will get over that information when it comes to age, but anyone working, exercising, or spending long periods of time in hot conditions is also more susceptible. The good news is dehydration is preventable. Drinking fluids regularly throughout the day, not just when you feel thirsty, because usually when you feel thirsty, that's when you're already dehydrated. So it's also important to watch yourself and your coworkers for signs of dehydration, like thirst, dry mouth, dizziness, headache, or fatigue. So if dehydration does occur, mild cases can often be treated with drinking water or electrolyte beverages. More severe dehydration may require intravenous fluids, and serious dehydration should also be treated as a medical emergency. So staying hydrated is one of the easiest and most effective ways to protect yourself against heat-related illnesses. While PPE is critical for protecting workers from the job's hazards, it can also increase the risk of heat-related illness by making it harder for the body to stay cool. One of that reason is it increases heat retention, which a lot of PPE does. So if you have like waterproof aprons, surgical gowns, respirators, face shields, boots, and gloves, they can trap that heat and moisture close to that body. And this reduces that effectiveness of sweating, and it makes it more difficult for the body to release that excess of heat. Additionally, PPE can also require extra physical effort. Many types of protective gear add weight, bulk, or restrict movement, which means that the body has to work harder during normal tasks. That added effort creates more internal heat and places additional strain on the worker. Because of this, heat management becomes even more important when PPE is required, and workers should take breaks, stay hydrated, monitor themselves and coworkers for any sign of heat stress, and use just cooling strategies whenever possible. Another major heat hazard that can contribute it is physical exertion. So if you're doing a lot of physical strenuous activity, it can cause that body or your body to generate significant internal heat. And that heavy work is performed in hot environments a lot of the times. That added heat can quickly increase the risk of heat stress. This is known as exertional heat stress, or EHS, and it happens when physical activity in hot conditions raises the body's core temperature beyond safe levels. So workers performing demanding tasks such as lifting, digging, carrying materials, pushing equipment, or operating machinery, they're often at a greater risk, especially the harder and longer they work. So there are several warning signs to watch for, which is dehydration, rapid heart rate, muscle cramps, dizziness, nausea, fatigue, and an elevated body temperature. These symptoms are ignored, the condition can worsen very quickly. So heat strain can also affect mental focus as the body becomes overheated. Alertness, coordination, and decision making may also decline. And that's not only increases the risk of heat illness, but also raises the chance of workplace accidents and injuries. Some individuals are more vulnerable to heat illness because of their fitness level, medical history, or well, their body just hasn't adjusted to the heat. I have a harder time adjusting to heat, especially in the humidity, due to a physical ailment that I have, which is called Raynaud's syndrome, which it reduces the ability for my body to regulate temperature, essentially. And so I have to acclimatize myself maybe longer than, say, a normal healthy individual the same age as me. So workers who are not acclimated to hot conditions are at higher risk of getting a heat illness. Acclimatization, which is a very hard word for me to say, I don't know why, but it is. And it's the process where the body gradually adapts to working in warm or hot environments over a period of time. And without the adjustment period, the body has a harder time regulating that temperature, which increases the likelihood of heat stress. And this is especially important for like new employees, workers who are returning from maybe time away, or anyone that's suddenly exposed to harder conditions. Now, I know we can't acclimate if we have a sudden one. This is where you would have to choose to set up more strict break times, hydration cycles, um, working maybe earlier in the day or later in the day to prevent any heat illness, especially if we know that there might be a heat wave. Some medications can also affect the thermoregulation and fluid balance within the body. So, like diuretics, antipsychotics, antidepressants, and any certain blood pressure medications may be harder. For individuals who are taking any medications, especially like older adults, it'd be good just to go to their doctor and just see if there's any practical steps that they can take to alleviate any of these symptoms from their medication. Anyone within other practical steps could just be like increase fluid intake, um, drink more like electrolyte if it like specifically targets electrolyte balance. Also, just closely monitoring for any early warning signs of any heat stress, such as dizziness, nausea, rapid heart rate, weakness, or confusion. Just taking care of those people who may know. They don't necessarily have to tell you, but that's up again up to them. But it would be good if they would talk to their doctor just to see what they can do to regulate that. So one of the main changes when aging with heat illness is age. Age does affect you. It affects the body in several ways, makes it more difficult to safely manage heat exposure. It reduces heat tolerance. Older adults do not adjust as easily to sudden changes in temperature, and the body becomes less efficient at regulating core temperature. So this makes it harder to stay cool during the hot conditions and increases the risk of that heat stress. There's also several psychological changes that can contribute to this risk. For example, cognitive awareness can be affected. Healthy older adults may not recognize early signs of overheating or dehydration right away, which can delay the response. The body also retains more heat with age, so sweat glands tend to produce less sweat, and the heart may not circulate blood as efficiently, which will reduce the body's ability to release that heat through the skin. Additional also chronic health conditions will play a role. It's like heart disease, because they're also taking that medication for those chronic diseases. So older adults especially should take extra precautions, just including staying well hydrated, limiting exposure during peak heat, taking frequent breaks in cool or shaded areas, and closely just monitoring early signs of heat illness. So now we covered the major risk factors of the heat illness. We're going to move on to something just as important, which is just simple safety practices that help prevent those illnesses from happening in the first place. Good news is that many heat-related incidents can be prevented with planning, awareness, and a few practical steps. So on the first day of heat exposure, employees should really work no more than 20% of the full shift at full intensity. And from there, workload can gradually increase by no more than 20% each day until the worker becomes acclimated. And this is especially important for new employees, workers returning from work, or anyone who's like exposed to sudden temperature changes. Employers can also reduce heat strain by adjusting schedules and workloads. So you can include like shortening shifts, rotating physically demanding tasks, scheduling heavy work during like cooler parts of the morning or the evening. During peak heat hours, strenuous work should be limited whenever possible. Frequent rest breaks in shaded cool area or air conditioned area are also critical for allowing the body just time to recover. And then hydration is another key in preventing, which we've talked about throughout this presentation. So you see, employers should provide cool, accessible drinking water and encourage workers to drink regularly, about 1 cup every 20 minutes, even if they don't feel thirsty. By the time someone does feel thirsty, that's when dehydration has set in. Proper hydration just helps the body regulate the temperature, and it greatly lowers the risk of heat stress. So providing that potable drinking water also is just a best practice and is required under the OSHA sanitation standards. Engineering controls can also make a big difference. So improving airflow with fans, ventilation, or air conditioning just helps increase that evaporated cooling and lowers heat buildup in the work area. Clothing also matters. So whenever possible, workers should wear light-colored, loose-fitting, breathable clothing that allows sweat to evaporate. Fabrics like cotton, linen are generally better choices than, say, polyester, nylon, or other materials that trap heat. Loose clothing allows better airflow and helps the body cool more efficiently. Wide brim hats can also help protect the face and the neck and shoulders from direct sun exposure, while sunglasses or tinted safety glasses help protect the eyes. Sun protection is also simple. but an important step. So workers who spend time outdoors should apply sunscreen before starting work and reapply throughout the day, especially if they're sweating heavily. For jobs that require PPE or work near any radiant heat sources, specialized cooling equipment may also be helpful. Reflective clothing, cooling vests, circulating air systems, and water-cooled garments can all reduce heat exposure when selected appropriately for the task. They can be very effective. In the place that I used to work at, we had a department that was throughout the year, no matter what day, it was 96 degrees because of the resin that they used for making the laminated board. And also because of the resin that they made using that for that laminated board, we had to get a powered respirator, or a PAPR is what they're called. And you would think that when it comes to like respirators, they can tend to be stuffy and hot. But the nice thing about that PAPR is though it had a hood that they would wear, so they didn't have to shave their beard if they didn't want to, which for some of them they didn't want to. But it also had a fan that blowed into that hood, which would also help with cooling. So it would cool that sweat and that heat could dissipate off of them. So it was they actually rather enjoyed them because they were being cooled with their own personal fan. So the next group that I have here is just some more simple safety practices. They focus on awareness, teamwork, and being prepared to respond quickly when heat illness occurs. Even with strong preventive efforts, workers and supervisors still need to recognize warning signs early and take immediate action. So one of the best tools on the job site is looking out for each other. Really just having your workers, because workers who work together often know how each other acts. And if someone starts acting different than they normally are, or are not doing things that they would normally do, those would be common warning signs. So like, it could be dizziness, fainting, nausea, headache, confusion, weakness, heavy sweating, muscle cramps, or even spasms. If anyone shows symptoms, action should be taken right away. Move that worker to a cool area, provide water. If they are alert, begin cooling efforts. And when in doubt, always call 911. So quick response can save lives, because when you're getting into heat exhaustion and heat stroke, that is where time is of the essence. Training is another important part of prevention. So employees should understand the hazards of heat exposure, how heat illness develops, early symptoms to watch for, and the steps to take if someone does become ill. Supervisors should also know how to respond quickly and when emergency medical help is needed. Employers should also develop an employee action plan for heat. And this plan just should outline who to contact, where cooling areas are located, who will call emergency services, how to direct responders to the site, and what first aid steps should be taken while you're waiting for help. Because having a plan in place does save valuable time during an emergency, especially when everyone knows their task to that plan. So each location, obviously each job task may have unique health hazards. They may not be the same from one site to the next. So they need to be evaluated before any of the work is done. And also throughout the day, because things change throughout the day. Supervisors and workers should regularly assess changing conditions such as temperature, humidity, workload, PPE use, and worker fatigue, then make adjustments as needed. First aid supplies, this is a good one, should also just be reviewed for hot weather operations. Obviously, in the winter, you won't need some of these things and you can remove them. But just in addition to any standard items, consider adding like cold packs, disposable thermometers, electrolyte drink mixes or tablets, emergency water pouches, cooling blankets, and waterproof tape. Just having the right supplies readily available can improve response time and help stabilize that worker until further care is available. So now that we talked about the signs and symptoms of heat illness, we're going to talk about heat-related illnesses as it is an umbrella term, and described several conditions that happen when the body can no longer cool itself properly and core body temperature begins to rise. So these illnesses can range from a mild to life-threatening. So recognizing the warning signs early is important. And this is just general information, and it's not intended as a first aid class. None of the classes that I offer are certified per se, like you don't get a certificate after them. If you are using this maybe for your yearly requirement for training, if you have employees sign off, that's completely fine. I just don't certify anything. So most of the common heat-related illnesses are like heat rash, heat cramps. One thing I didn't ever hear about until I started doing this was rhabdomyolysis. We'll talk about that. Heat syncope, heat exhaustion, and then heat stroke as the worst. So we're going to focus on heat rash, and heat rashes also could be called like prickly heat or malaria. And it's not just something that affects babies. Adults can develop it too, especially when working in hot, humid conditions. Or if you're like my husband and you sweat excessively, that can also happen. So heat rash happens when the sweat becomes trapped in the skin instead of evaporating. And when that occurs, the skin becomes irritated and inflamed. And workers may notice itchy red spots, small bumps, or tiny blisters. And it most commonly appears on like the face, the neck, back, chest, or thigh area where sweat or friction build up. Some of the cases can be very itchy and uncomfortable. While heat rash is usually not dangerous, it can be very distracting, irritating, and naturally may signal that the body is struggling with the heat. And it's also one of the most common heat-related issues, and especially when working in warm workplaces. Good news is heat rash is often improves once the skin is cooled down, so that's kind of nice. And the worker is removed from the hot environment. Prevention is simple and effective, so keep the skin as cool and as dry as possible. Wear lightweight or breathable clothing. Stay hydrated. Take breaks in cool areas when available. For relief, you could also do like a cool compress can help. Tight fitting clothing should be avoided at all costs. And if the rash does not improve, becomes painful or worsens, medical advice should be sought. The best way to prevent heat rash is to keep the skin cool and dry as much as possible. When sweat is allowed to evaporate, it helps regulate the body's temperature, as you know. So wearing that lightweight, loose-fitting clothing can make that big difference. Staying hydrated is also important. If it does occur, cooling the skin is the first step. Move to a cooler area if possible. Allow the skin to dry and apply cool compresses for relief. Most cases improve quickly with these simple steps. So if it does come severe, again, contact a health provider. Next is heat cramps. Heat cramps are painful muscle cramps or spasms, and they can happen during or after physical work in hot environments. They're often one of the earliest warning signs that the body is being affected from the heat stress. Cramps are usually occur in the muscles that are working hard and becoming fatigued, such as like your calves, your thighs, your arms, your back, shoulders, or your abdomen. Workers doing any heavy labor, repetitive movement, or prolonged activity in the heat are especially at risk. And these heat cramps are typically sudden, painful, and involuntary muscle spasms. And they can last for a short time, but they also come and go repeatedly. Even though they may seem minor, they should not be ignored. The most preventive strategy is staying hydrated at all times. Workers should drink plenty of water before, during, and after physical activity, especially when working in the hot conditions. Do not wait until you feel thirsty, because again, thirsty is a late sign of dehydration. Replacing electrolytes is also important when sweating heavily. eating balanced meals or foods that contain electrolytes can also help support the body, particularly before any strenuous activity in the heat. In some cases, electrolyte replacement drinks may also be helpful during extended work. Workers should also reduce or avoid substances that contribute to dehydration, such as alcohol or excessive caffeine. And these can make it just the body harder to stay properly hydrated. Another prevention step is like limiting strenuous activity during the hottest parts of the day whenever possible. And if the task can be scheduled earlier in the morning or later in the day, heat stress risks can often be reduced. Heat exhaustion is a serious heat-related illness that occurs when the body overheats due to exposure to high temperatures, strenuous activity, and the loss of too much water and salt through that sweating. And it's one of the three main heat-related illnesses, with heat cramps being the mildest and heat stroke being the most severe. Heat exhaustion can develop quickly or build gradually over time, especially during physical demanding work in hot or humid conditions. And this is why early recognition is so important. So common signs, as you see on the screen, is clammy or cool skin, excessive sweating, dizziness, headache, muscle cramps, extreme thirst, dehydration, weakness, nausea, vomiting, and decreased urine output. Some workers may also feel faint or may actually lose consciousness. A rapid heartbeat, fatigue, and difficulty concentrating can also occur. Workers experiencing heat exhaustion may become less alert, slower to react, or unable to continue working safely. So if not treated promptly, heat exhaustion can actually progress into heat stroke, which is a life-threatening medical emergency. So when it comes to heat exhaustion, first you want to wear loose-fitting clothing, lightweight, breathable clothing whenever possible, because heavy or tight clothing does keep the heat closer to the body. If working outdoors, protect yourself from the sun. Direct sun exposure increases that body temperature. Hydration is one of the most important prevention tools. Drink regularly throughout the day. Staying hydrated. Workers should also be aware that certain medications or medical conditions can also increase the risk of heat illness. Another important step is to pace yourself during the hottest parts of the day. Whenever possible, schedule that heavy work in the cooler morning, or if the evening is cool in the evening. Acclimatization is also critical if possible. I know we're not going to be very, I don't know what kind of work you do, but I don't know how acclimated you'll be for this weekend. So that's something to look at and also be aware of. Finally, I'll always stay alert for any warning signs in yourself or others. If something begins feeling wrong, dizzy, weak, or anything like that, early action is preventable. So if you are not feeling well yourself, take the steps. Be like, hey, I am not feeling well. I have these symptoms. Drink water, get into a cool space, and cool yourself off. So this is the most deadly heat-related illness, which is heat stroke. It's a life-threatening medical emergency, and it occurs when that body overheats and can no longer regulate its internal temperature. The body temperature rises rapidly, and without immediate treatment, heat stroke can cause permanent organ damage or death. Heat stroke is typically caused by prolonged exposure to high temperatures and intense physical exertion, or a combination of both. And it can happen outdoors during hot or humid weather, especially when performing strenuous work. Warning signs and symptoms may include confusion, altered mental status, or unusual behavior such as irritability or disorientation. Affected individuals may exhibit slurred speech, poor coordination, or difficulty walking. In more severe cases, symptoms can progress to seizures or a loss of consciousness. Physical signs often include hot skin, which may be either dry or moist, just depending on whether the person is still sweating. While heat stroke is commonly associated with absence of sweating, it's Important to know that sweating may still be present, especially in cases caused by physical exertion. A very high body temperature is a key indicator and should be treated as an emergency. But one of the things, because not everyone has a thermometer, one of the things that to look for though is the neurological issues that may happen, which is they slurred speech, disoriented, irritable, stuff like that. Those will be the clear signs that that's a big issue. If heat stroke is suspected, call 911 immediately, move that person to a cool area, remove excessive clothing, and begin cooling them right away using cold water, ice packs, fans, or a cool wet cloth. Do not leave that person alone. The heat stroke can happen quickly and become fatal if it is ignored. And recognizing those symptoms early and acting fast, it can save a life. So the employer's role in preventing heat illness through a heat illness prevention plan. And this is one of the things that I can help with when it comes to this. I can grab like a template for a heat illness plan, just kind of walk you through how to start one. Heat illness prevention plan is a written commitment just to outline how a company will prevent heat-related incidents and protect employees who may be exposed to hot working conditions. And it serves just as a roadmap for keeping workers safe before heat becomes a problem. So employers are responsible for providing a workplace free from any known safety hazards, and that includes heat hazards. So when an employee works outdoors, indoors near heat-producing equipment, or an environment where excessive heat may be present, steps should be taken to reduce that risk. A strong heat illness prevention plan identifies where heat hazards exist, who may be exposed, and what conditions will be used to protect workers. And it should also explain how the company will provide water, rest breaks, shade or cooling areas, training, emergency response procedures, and monitoring for signs of heat illness. So most importantly, the plan should be practical, communicated clearly to employees, and consistently followed by supervisors and management. And a written plan is not just paperwork. It is a proactive safety tool, and it just helps prevent injuries, illnesses, and even fatalities. So a strong program is essential anywhere employees may be exposed to those hot human conditions. So it starts with a risk assessment, and the employer should regularly evaluate any of the workplace when it comes to, if you have like different job sites, just to identify where heat hazards exist, which job tasks are high risk, and which employees may most be vulnerable. And this could include looking at temperature, humidity, workload, and duration of exposure. The next are control measures. So once a hazard is identified, steps need to be taken to reduce the risk. And this might include like providing shade or cool rested areas, adjusting work schedules, increasing break frequency, stuff like that. Ongoing monitoring and evaluation is also important, which conditions can change throughout the day. So employers should continuously assess how effective their controls are and make adjustments as needed. Worker training is critical, because if an employee doesn't know what they're supposed to do or know the signs and symptoms of heat illness, then they will not know what to do if that happens, or they may not understand why they're feeling unwell. Another key component is acclimatization. Workers who are new to heat, returning, or who are introduced not introduced gradually. This helps the body just to kind of build that tolerance with that acclimatization. Hydration should be encouraged throughout the entire workday. Water should be readily available, and workers should be reminded to drink frequently, not just when they feel thirsty again. And lastly, making sure they have appropriate clothing that plays a role. Wearing that lightweight, loose-fitting, and breathable clothing helps the body cool itself more effectively. And then when these components are in place and consistently followed, employers can actually significantly reduce that heat risk at their facilities. So we're going to talk about the employer responsibilities and what a strong heat illness prevention program should include. That's what we just talked about, but we're going to actually talk about what happens when an inspection comes into play, VOSHA comes on site. So inspectors may actually review several components when it comes to heat illness prevention program, including procedures for providing water, rest break, shade, cooling. Another will be employee interviews. They will interview the employees just to kind of see what their understanding is, what they know about the heat, if you guys have a heat plan, what they know about the heat plan, what they know their role is when it comes to looking at their employees or their coworkers and themselves when it comes to any hazards, reviewing the knowledge of any symptoms and response actions if they have those in their job description or whatever. Enforcement under the general duty clause. So that's what VOSHA will enforce heat-related hazards under, is the general duty clause. And this just provision requires employers to provide a workplace free of recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. Yeah. So if excessive heat exposure is identified as a recognized hazard and adequate protective measures are not in place, enforcement action may be taken under that authority. And then heat inspection will be triggered in several ways, and these can include employee complaints, referrals from other agencies, reports of heat-related hospitalizations or fatalities, or observations made by a compliance officer during a workplace inspection. An additional would be like if the temperature reaches 80 degrees or higher, or there are heat advisories or warnings, which many cases heat-related incidents involving an employee may prompt a closer review of the employee's overall heat illness prevention efforts. So if a VOSHA inspector does arrive at your workplace, say tomorrow, and interviewed 3 employees, would those employees be able to explain your heat illness procedures, where to find water, and what to do if a coworker shows signs of heat-related stress? And I actually am here in the office today because they are doing a wet bulb globe temperature training and going over the National Emphasis Program. And so during an inspection, VOSHA is going to use or may use a wet bulb globe temperature monitoring equipment to assess working conditions and better understand the level of heat exposure employees are experiencing. And those measures can be taken in areas where employees are performing work, particularly in locations where elevated temperatures, direct sunlight, or heat generating processes are present. And it's important to understand that the heat hazard assessment is not based solely like on a single temperature reading. Inspectors will also consider factors such as physical demand of the work being performed, the duration of the exposure, the clothing or personal protective equipment being worn, acclimatization, and any existing controls the employer has implemented. So the purpose of the wet bulb globe temperature monitoring equipment is just to provide an accurate picture of the workplace conditions and just to help to determine whether employees may be exposed to a heat-related hazard. It's really just to make sure that we know all of the facts and we can actually actively show the employer, hey, look, this is what we are reading. What things do you have in place for heat-related issues when it comes to your workforce? And that is our training today. As we know, safety is in our own hands. Any questions that you may have? Of course, my computer is ridiculous. I don't know if you're able to, maybe you can put them in the chat. Do you have any questions? All right. Well, if there's no questions, don't hesitate to. You can send me an email, Jesse. But I will. This presentation was recorded, and once it is uploaded, I can forward that to you. Yeah, have nothing else. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and absolutely, and stay cool, as it's going to be a hot one. Take care.